It's 6 o'clock in London, it's 1 p.m. in New York, 1 a.m. in Hong Kong, 3 a.m. in Sydney, 10 a.m. in San Francisco, and 10:30 at night in Mumbai. Here in the middle of a chilly Poland, it's 7 p.m. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Patrick L. Young, the IPO-VID live stream, Series 21, starting Series 21 today. It's episode 1. That gives us the beautiful number of episode 121 starts here. And first up, let's talk about Japan. Given the fact that in London, even broker transgressions are kept a secret, JPX are to be applauded for bringing in a name and shame regime for companies who do not comply with the rules of the stock exchange. Let's see it applied to listings, brokers, and advisors the world over, please. Meanwhile, at ASX, Sydney is heating up. The RBA, that's the Reserve Bank of Australia, the central bank, they delivered a scorecard of mediocrity to the ASX group, and indeed, now the Australian Shareholders Association want the chairman gone within a year. I have to say, why the delay? Stand down now, Damien Roach. ASX has failed the markets after a generation of monopoly milking has left management looking more like Japanese knotweed than a coherent team to build the future of markets. Please resign at the AGM. You and your team have sadly failed. Meanwhile, in BitCarnage, it was another big and somewhat grim week for lawfare, with Voyager amongst those being indicted. In the case of Voyager, indicted by the CFTC. No better than a house of cards, commented CFTC Commissioner Kristen Johnson, which brings us neatly to that house of cards, which CFTC Chairman Rustin Benham seemed, at the very least, to be benevolently neutral about for all of last year. Anybody fancy SBF for president? Last week's revelation of a $5 billion possible bribe to one Donald J. Trump to not stand again as president sounded like a mere bagatelle compared to the more recent announcement. The concept of Sam Bankman-Fried for president is purely quite beyond the bizarre, even for what is turning out to be a remarkable trial. However, that's not the worst thing to happen in crypto during the course of the last week. The version 1.0 extinction level event may be upon us, with revelations that Hamas have laundered millions through cryptocurrency to wage their genocidal attack on Israel. Can cryptocurrency survive the subsequent crackdown? I believe if you mix money laundering and Hamas together, the result is going to be the crypto v1.0 extinction level event, which we brought to our readers of Exchange Invest last Wednesday. On to happier matters. Our guest today is John Ensley. Our topic is how to bank on yourself. John Ensley is a leading financial planner. He's leading a financial planning revolution to help you take back control of your money. After losing almost everything during the Great Recession, John became obsessed with finding safe, predictable ways to save and create wealth. John, welcome to IPO-VID. Where in the world are you today?
Thanks for having me, Patrick. I'm super excited to be here. I am in also a little on the cool side, Washington State here in the U.S.
My goodness, so you're pretty much close to as far up on the northwestern corner as you can possibly be without actually reaching Alaska. You're not that far away.
Well, Alaska's still a good bit, but yes, up in that northern quarter for sure.
You're in that northern quarter of what I would call the U.S. mainland, with Alaska being that sort of funny little carbuncle attached onto Canada, whoever that is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So look, I mean, fascinating. So tell me a bit about yourself. Were you actually born in the Pacific Northwest?
I was raised in Southern Oregon, which is a state just south of Washington State here. But I've lived in Washington a long, long time. So I'm a Pacific Northwest native and currently in the Puget Sound area, a little town called Shelton, Washington.
The Puget Sound, how beautiful, portrayed in many wonderful documentaries and films over the years, but one place I have not yet made it to on my travels in the United States of America, but it sounds quite idyllic altogether. So tell me, John, from your being a native of that beautiful area, what got you involved in the financial services business?
Well, so my journey into financial services really kind of got started back in the late 90s. I had gotten out of the U.S. Army and was in the right place at the right time and went to work for a company And they had if you remember the late 90s, were building up, the tech bubble was inflating, and they were going to do an IPO, and it was super exciting time. And then, of course, when the tech bubble burst, the IPO came off the table, and none of that really happened. And I left there with some money in an employee stock ownership plan, which is kind of like a retirement plan in the U.S., and did some calculations, and decided, based on tax exposure sometime down the road, to do something a little different. So invested that money in a real estate project, developing a little subdivision in Southwest Washington State. And we were building spec homes, new construction spec homes. And this, of course, was in the mid 2000s, as we built up to the housing bubble was inflating. We built up to the Great Recession. And that project did not end well, but fortunately, it was kind of a wake-up call for me. And I began to do a lot of studying and reading and learning and educating myself on mostly financial topics, but also just about life. And somewhere in that process, I was on a webinar, and I heard an advisor talking about this couple and their home equity. And he started talking about a cash value life insurance policy. And it was the first time I'd heard anything remotely like this. And so I began to look into that angle a little more, and found some books, a book in particular called Bank on Yourself. It was written by a very smart lady named Pamela Yellen in 2009, I want to say. And so I learned about using cash value life insurance as an alternative to some of the more conventional approaches, set these policies up for myself, and began to use them. Got very excited about this idea. And I realized that all of the financial advisors I'd ever been to really they didn't ever mention anything like this. And being ready for a career change, I got my licensing, more training, and started my practice in 2012, specifically to help people understand these concepts and implement them if it's the right fit.
Wow, that's a lot of information in one go. Let me take you back a couple of steps, actually. I'm really interested, John. Tell us, what did you do in the US military?
I was airborne infantry. I had a couple of stints with the 101st Airborne Division, spent some time in Germany, and a little bit of time in a long-range reconnaissance unit.
Wow, the 101st Airborne, they're a rather famous unit from history. They've had many different exciting and I'm sure quite terrifying missions over time. Well, thank you very much for your service, John. We really appreciate that, as we're coming up towards certainly Veterans Day, Remembrance Day in the UK, just under a month from now, and in much of Europe. So, really interested. I mean, going through this process where you saw your savings all just rather disappear in this property process, how did you go about actually finding? I mean, how did you reach this book, Bank on Yourself?
So somewhere during that presentation on the webinar that I mentioned, this particular advisor mentioned the titles of a couple of books, not Bank on Yourself, coincidentally. And from those books, I then found the Bank on Yourself material. So there was a lot of studying involved to kind of get my head around these concepts that I really hadn't heard about before. So it was pretty skeptical at first, of course, but as I learned more and ultimately implemented it in my own life, I realized it's a really powerful tool, and people should know about it.
I think upfront skepticism is a very good thing to have at all points in time with everything to do with financial matters, and therefore I commend you for starting from such a position, doing your due diligence. So explain to us, tell us a little bit about how this Bank on Yourself concept works. You've already given us a great teaser.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Patrick. So the way I describe it is we use the unique features of properly structured cash value life insurance, in particular whole life insurance here in the U.S., as a platform for saving, borrowing, and investing. So that's what I refer to as the banking equation. We all use it. We save, we borrow, and we invest. And we tend to use the conventional banking system, brokerages, the places like that to facilitate it. So really what we're doing is we're taking the unique features of cash value life insurance and using that to create a sort of an alternative method of saving, borrowing, and investing. So that's kind of what it is in a nutshell. We can get a lot more technical on how they work and things like that as well.
Help us a little bit here, because I think probably this may be something that's better known in America. What exactly is cash value life assurance, and how does it work, life insurance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, of course, life insurance is simply a contract between an insurance company and an individual, with the life of the person being the subject of that contract. And most people are familiar with term insurance, where we purchase a death benefit for a given amount of time, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, et cetera. So cash value life insurance is also called permanent life insurance. I used the word whole life here a few minutes ago, and whole life insurance covers you for your whole life, your entire life. And so the nature of a cash value life insurance contract is that it builds up or accumulates what's called cash value within the contract. So as you pay your premiums over the years, there's a component of that that builds as cash value. And cash value is something that you can access while you're still alive in order to do pretty much whatever you want with that accumulated cash in these contracts.
Fascinating. Okay, I get this now. I'm always quite interested in life insurance. Of course, as you probably know, I think the biggest change in life insurance was just after the South Sea bubble in 1720, when a series of financial reforms came in as a result of various people being bitten by the financial scams that have been around. One of them being the fact that that was the point in time when the United Kingdom, and indeed pretty much the rest of the known world, started instituting a ban on you being able to buy life insurance on an unrelated third party, which was, of course, the very exciting concept that you could see Freddie walking down the street, coughing his guts out and thinking, oh, Freddie doesn't look too good there. I think I'll buy a quick 1 or 2 year term insurance. And actually, the trick with those policies was to try and get somebody while they were still going, barely, but never actually managed to make any payments, because you still got quite a good payout out of it because it was a term insurance. So it's one of the useful pieces of trivia, or probably useless, I'm sure my wife will tell me later, pieces of trivia I know about life insurance. So this accumulation of the term value, explain a little bit more to me about the workings. And what I mean here is a lot of financial products that involve an intermediary, I mean an IFA, a financial advisor, whoever it might be, but quite a lot of the time, some of these products, you're paying the advisor for a long time before you're really actually paying any benefit. Do these products work so that you're automatically getting some of the benefit? I'm not trying, by the way, to demean or suggest that financial advisors should not get paid, but it's just depending on how these work. Sometimes the advisor gets a huge chunk of money up front, or sometimes they get it slightly deferred. What's the kind of ratio, or how do these products work in that way?
Great question, Patrick. And I actually talk a lot in my practice about fees, advisor fees, whether it's asset under management fees or a commission that an insurance-based advisor receives, or a fee-only type planner. Those are really the three types that we have here. Those fees are a key component of the overall performance, and you have to take them into account. So with term insurance, you're exactly right. You pay the premium on that term, and if you don't die in that 10 or 15 or 20 years, then there's really been no benefit paid. So that's one of the big differences with permanent life insurance or cash value life insurance, is that death benefit is in place. So you're paying your premium, and if you die, then there's a death benefit that's going to pass to your beneficiaries. However, while you're still living and you haven't died, this cash value accumulation that's building up within that contract is something you can access while you're still living. And we do that through a kind of a unique system where we can borrow against the equity in this policy from the insurance company at extremely favorable rates. We can use those funds for anything we want, make investments or major purchases, whatever the case may be. And as we're repaying those loans on these policy loans that we're paying back to the insurance company, if it's set up the right way with the right types of companies, the cash value in those policies continues to grow in the background as if that borrowed amount was still fully there. And so it creates a very unique way to finance things, whether that be investments, major purchases, whatever the case may be. It's a very attractive way to self-finance or become, bank on yourself.
Wow. That's very, very interesting, John. Okay, so let me just actually stop you there for 1 second. So I want to say hello to another John. John T says, good evening. Hey, John T, it's lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining the show. Ladies and gentlemen, I see we've got great viewer numbers this evening. Absolutely terrific. And thank you very, very much to the two people who have already given us hearts this evening that I can see on my screen. We really appreciate it. A little bit of love goes a long way in these discussions because it helps those artificial intelligence agents that are there on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube understand better that this is great and arresting content. And we would like to be as high up as we possibly can be in our niche, because of course that gives us the opportunity for more people to see this content. So do please share a little bit of love. Thank you very, very much for being so engaged with the show this evening. Now, John Ensley, I'm here discussing how to bank on yourself with financial advisor John Ensley from the Pacific Northwest in the USA. We're talking about these. Oh, thank you very, very much. Let me also say, Ian Miller, good evening. Good evening to you from the UK. We're getting a bit of love there going all the way to the far northwestern coast of the United States of America via Poland. It's going east and west simultaneously. Really appreciate it, Ian. Thank you very much. John, you've explained very briefly how these things work. Is there also a significant taxation component? I mean, obviously I realize you're in the USA, so I'm only going to ask you to discuss it in the USA. We're not going to try and discuss it for other countries. But is there a significant taxation component that provides an advantage for investors and holders of these policies in the US?
There's an entire section of the Internal Revenue Code here in the US that addresses life insurance specifically, and it's probably one of the most misunderstood or little known sections of the code that there is. And specifically, life insurance has a number of tax benefits. So first of all, the accumulation of these cash values in permanent life insurance accumulates on a tax deferred basis. So as it's growing over the years, we're not paying tax on that accumulation until we actually remove that cash from the policy at some point. But we also have some protections there as well, in that when we take these policy loans that I was mentioning, we can take those loans also tax-free because it's a loan and we'd be paying that back. So the third piece is that we can withdraw up to our basis, which is roughly what we paid into the policy. We can withdraw that amount of cash value at any time from the policy without a taxable event as well. So until we dip into what would be considered gains, that's the only time there would be a taxable event to withdraw that cash out from the policy. And then the final component is the death benefit. In most cases, unless the estate is very large, the death benefit passes to the beneficiaries also on an income tax-free basis. So there's actually a wide range of tax benefits to using these types of policies.
Totally understand it. I mean, that's very, very interesting as well. So therefore, I understand, because essentially you're borrowing the money out of an asset, which is the pool that you've got in the life insurance. So therefore, you're not instantly attracting any taxation at that point, because you're essentially borrowing against another asset. And then you're paying some degree of interest back to the insurance company. So therefore, the insurance company's happy because it makes a little bit of extra money out of you. But as you say, they do so at attractive rates. And when you borrow the money out of the policy, do you specify how long you want to borrow it for upfront, or is it flexible the way that you do this? How does that work?
That's a great question, Patrick. One of the key components here is that you, the borrower, has absolute control over that repayment term. So really what's happening when we take a policy loan is we're not borrowing the cash from our specific policy. We're borrowing from the life insurance company. The life insurance company is heavily regulated in what they can invest in. And one of the things that they can invest in that the regulators like are policy loans to their own policy owners. So what they're really doing is using your policy as collateral. The amount of cash value that you have in the policy is the limit of what they will loan you. And the death benefit in the policy is the actual collateral. And so because the death benefit is the collateral, if you never pay the loan back, the life insurance company is secure, because when you die, and we're all going to die, when you die at some point in the future, that loan will get offset from those death benefits before they pass to your beneficiaries. So because of that kind of unique setup, the borrower is now in complete control of the repayment schedule. They can pay it back over any amount of time at any level that they want to. They can start payments, they can stop payments, they can increase, they can decrease. They're in complete control of that repayment schedule. So if you use that as an example of someone that's, say, investing in real estate or flipping properties, et cetera, that flexibility is a tremendous benefit to be able to use it that way.
Yes, I mean, I can see that's obviously a huge benefit that you therefore can be paying in. So let me ask you just a question generally about these sorts of policies. I mean, all things obviously work better, generally speaking, at scale. But how do these work? I mean, can you take advantage of this at more or less any level of income, or do you have to really reach a certain threshold of, say, income or amount of money that you're going to save into the policy before it starts to become a much more efficient investment for you?
So the answer to that question is really twofold. I think higher net worth individuals or people that get into these can fund them with larger amounts, and it's possible to start a policy with a large lump sum on the front end and have access to more of that cash sooner. However, I would say the most common thing for most folks is that they're going to build this up over time. So they're going to save a certain amount out of their income or out of a project and contribute it to the policy on a monthly or annual basis. And it does take a little time to build that cash value up. But really any income level from, I usually tell younger clients that are coming in the door that somewhere around $500 a month is the bare bones minimum. And it's not that we can't design policies for less than that. It's just that they don't become very meaningful. It takes some time to become a meaningful cash value vehicle at much below that. And then, people put millions of dollars a year into these types of vehicles as well.
Of course, I can fully appreciate very rapidly that high net worth individuals are going to find these hugely advantageous, and I suppose there's something that are useful that they can either run. I don't know if they run them in tandem with a trust sort of setup, or whether they run them as an alternative to a trust setup. Is that, am I in the right sort of area of thinking?
Yes, absolutely. A common practice to have policies both held within a trust and outside of a trust, but working in conjunction with. There's literally an infinite almost number of ways to structure that.
That's very interesting altogether. Okay, so we're here talking about how to bank on yourself with John Ensley, who's a leading financial advisor in the Pacific Northwest. And John, I'm very interested, therefore, in the other thing you've mentioned. You mentioned obviously some people who may have lower income or younger people. Is there a particular age limit range at which you can bank on yourself, or is this concept open to essentially everybody?
So where age comes into play is we are talking about life insurance. So these types of policies that build cash value like this are they're pretty thoroughly underwritten. So there's a medical exam and there's some health qualifications. So the older we get, the more those qualifications probably come into play. So by the time someone's in their early 80s, for instance, it's going to be pretty problematic to get coverage. And so from that aspect, the younger someone is, the better. The old proverb, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is today applies. So at whatever age you are, I think it's worth looking into.
I have to say, you completely flummoxed me there, because I was going to guess you were going to say something like 50s or 60s would be the sort of upper age limit. But God bless America, by the time you're getting to their 80s, then this probably may not be quite such an easy thing to structure. That's quite sensational, actually, because it obviously gives a huge opportunity for people, and particularly in this day and age where so many people are either working quite a bit later or earning money from whatever they may be doing, not necessarily earning, but off their assets. They therefore have the ability to come in and bank on themselves much more flexibly.
Yes, it's a common misconception that you have to be young and perfectly healthy in order to do this. That's really not the case. You do have to be relatively healthy, but I have lots of clients in their 60s and 70s that are starting out with this.
That is really, really interesting. So presumably, I mean, the clients who are starting out in their 60s and 70s, the difference between them and say the clients who are starting out in their 20s are that the folks in the 20s, you're hoping that they're going to save like $500 a month and therefore build cash as they gradually work their way up the career ladder or the military ladder or whatever it's going to be. But with the people that are slightly older, presumably they're putting in quite large lump sums very, very rapidly to kickstart their life insurance pool, I suppose, and then borrowing back from that as they go.
That's exactly right. So the older clients that I have are really transferring assets that are sitting in other places into the life insurance contract in order to take advantage of some of these benefits that we've been talking about.
That's really, really fascinating. And I think that's actually a very apt moment that we might move to our book of the week, because as we're talking about 80-year-old people and looking towards the future, our book of the week this week comes from one of our previous guests, which was the fabulous Hamish McRae. And Hamish McRae, as we all know, is the author of The World in 2050, which was the topic actually of the IPO-VID we enjoyed with him. That was IPO-VID 114. You can find it under IPO-VID on LinkedIn. Hamish, an acclaimed author, former Euromoney editor, an adjunct professor at Trinity College Dublin, and indeed not only our IPO-VID guest, but somebody I must say I've been honoured and delighted to share a stage with at some conferences around the world in past years. It's a really bold and vital vision for our planet, the world in 2050. It's an essential projection for anyone worried about what the future holds. For if we understand how our world is changing, as Hamish says, we will be in a better position to secure our future in the decades to come. That seems like a very appropriate moment to be discussing something like life insurance for the future and how to bank on yourself with John Ensley. How remarkably well that dovetails into our conversation. Don't forget, our next book of the week will be an Exchange Invest's free weekend edition on Saturday. I have to say, cracking edition it looks like too. We were just editing parts of it today, and you can get that, sign up for that by going to exchangeinvest.com. And if you're interested in the world of exchanges and financial market infrastructure, you can sign up for that too, although that costs money, $349 a year, but there's a free 1-month trial to the Exchange of Information, the daily bulletin of the Bourse business, which is Exchange Invest. So yes, I mean, thinking how to think about the future with Hamish McRae, it's a fabulous book altogether, and I suppose with many of your clients, they're just going to be warming up by about 2050 at this stage, which is an interesting concept. So you talked a little bit about this whole policy. Is there a way that this works better? I mean, can families do it by each banking on themselves and then pulling the resources, or how can that work? And indeed, is it a good idea, John?
It is a good idea in a lot of cases. There's a couple of different ways to look at this from a family standpoint. The first of which is, imagine a family with multiple family members all owning these types of policies and building these types of cash values. They could certainly organize with each other, even through using a trust or something to make it very organized, or it could just be an informal organization between a family and become their own bank for the family, so to speak. So if Susie is going off to college and needs money to finance college, she can come to the family group, the family trust, and make her case to finance college through the family trust. Somebody wants to start a business or needs to make a purchase or whatever the case may be. There is this network, if you will, of cash value policies among the family members that can be used for the benefit of the family members. And it can create quite an interesting dynamic. The second approach, which I think is super interesting as well, is if a family is close and they're loving and they have good communication, then there's an opportunity for the younger generations to pay for the policies that are insuring the older generations, so that those death benefits are essentially being passed to the younger generation. So it's essentially a way for a family to finance their own inheritances and know exactly what those are going to be when and if those older generations, not if, when those older generations pass.
That's a very, very interesting concept. I hadn't really thought about it from that multi-generational aspect. So tell me, I mean, You talk about this. You've mentioned, and we've discussed the issue about taxes. We've talked about the fee issue to a certain degree. I mean, obviously, that is one thing that I suppose does concern many people. How do they manage to pay reasonably for the services they're getting, but at the same time not see their investments being eaten up by fees?
Yeah, it's a great point, and we touched on it earlier, but probably not quite enough. So, the biggest difference with, at least here in the U.S., the biggest difference with fees is on insurance products. They're more or less front loaded, and they're a known quantity. So with a whole life insurance contract, for instance, once that contract is issued, those costs are locked in. There's an illustration of values going forward, and those costs are locked in on the front end. So as the cash and the death benefits are growing within those contracts, that front end commission is becoming a smaller and smaller piece of the pie over time because it was locked in. When you compare that to asset management fees, where someone's paying a 1 or 2 or 3% fee on an investment account, as that account grows over the years, those fees are cumulative. They build on each other, and it becomes a larger and larger piece of that pie. And so that's a significant difference. So when I run comparisons, I've got a couple of charts. And again, there's a lot of ways to calculate this, but I often use an example. If I had $500,000 in an investment account that was growing what the S&P 500 has grown over the last 25 years, so you pull in those returns and calculate a 1% fee, it comes out at the end of 25 years to about 20% of the end account value that I paid in fees for that account. To compare the same thing with a life insurance policy, the same 500,000 over the same 25 years, it works out to a 1.5 to sometimes 3%. So it's a big difference, but it's front end loaded. So it is a larger amount on the front end that kind of depletes itself over time down to those percentages that I just mentioned. So it's an important component to take a look at. Here in the U.S. and the way my practice works, there are no additional fees to that. So whatever the insurance company is charging or building into the cost of that product, that policy, are the only costs that someone is going to pay in this example.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I think you make a very good point because, of course, also, in fact, you're being generous to some of the world's fund managers because some of them even charge you performance fees on top. And I see that's been a huge bone of contention recently, particularly with money market and interest rate funds, where some people are suddenly going, look at us, we're genius, we're making you much more money simply because quantitative easing has ended and interest rates have gone up to 5, 6, 7%. Mm-hmm. So that is a point very, very well made. And very easy to understand. Now, therefore, when you've put this money in, tell us a bit. I mean, give us some examples. What do people tend to do with this money when they're drawing it down and then investing it for themselves, being their own bank?
Great question, and I'd love to give you some examples. So one of my favorite examples is a young guy, Marine pilot, was overseas, saved a pretty large amount of money in the bank while he was overseas. When he came back home, is when I met him, and we began talking about these strategies. He also went out and bought a brand new Tesla when he got back to the States, and he financed it through a local dealership. And so we set up his policy. He started it with a large lump sum, about $100,000. And within one day, basically, of that policy being officially issued, we submitted the paperwork, and he borrowed $80,000 against his policy, and he paid off that Tesla. Okay. And then he continued making the same payment that he used to make to the bank, again, to that policy loan. It paid it off in about half the time that it would have. Wow. And so he was able to save thousands of dollars in interest, pay that car off. And today, this was quite a few years ago. Today, he uses his policy for real estate investments. He buys property flips and rentals.
That's understandable. I mean, that's very, very interesting. So I have to say, I mean, I admire the excitement of youth as a petrol head and a car guy, but I've never really managed to work up the excitement of paying $100,000 for a Tesla myself. That's nothing against electric cars. It's just ultimately something that I can't manage to quite get my head around in terms of the spending of huge amounts of money. And as you know, ladies and gentlemen, I spent last weekend commentating on the Malta Grand Prix for historic racing cars. So it's not as if I'm away from these things. Ian Miller, great question. Thank you so much, Ian. Very interesting concept. So interesting concept, well explained. Now, you may not be able to comment on this, John, but he's asking, can we get similar in the UK, or is this type of life policy only available in the US? Do you know?
I don't know definitively. I can only speak to the US market. That's where I'm licensed and that's where I work. It would surprise me if something similar is not available in the UK, but I can't give you the specifics.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely understandable. And we appreciate the fact that you're a regulated person, so therefore you don't want to give anybody advice that might be inaccurate even overseas. I am sorry, Ian, the answer is we don't know. And the reason actually John came on the show today was because I was fascinated by this, Ian, because as you know, I've lived in a lot of places around the world, and I have not heard of it before. I've only heard of it happening in the USA, and I'm quite intrigued to know why it isn't happening in the UK. If it isn't happening in the UK, perhaps it is. We just don't know. So that's something we'll have to dig into, Ian. If you find out first, let me know. Ping me a message. Thank you very much for your question. I'm sorry we can't give you a definitive answer around the world, but let me ask you, John. So when you're doing these drawdowns on your fund, do you have to pay a lot? And I'm not asking you for the chapter and verse in numbers. I mean, roughly speaking, is it expensive to do the paperwork for the drawdown, or is it essentially only a modest sort of frictional administrative fee?
So the policy loans are non-qualifying, meaning there's no application, there's no income verification, anything like that. It's just a form we fill out with the insurance company, and essentially just tell them where to send the money, which is usually a direct deposit into a bank account. So very, very simple. Usually that transfer happens in a week or less. So really relatively quick and simple process.
Okay, and therefore the insurance company, do they charge a fee or they charge a nominal fee? It's not some colossal administrative.
It varies a little company to company, but most of all the companies I work with and most of the companies I'm familiar with do not charge a fee for that policy.
Wow, that's even more impressive. And I was presuming they would charge a little something, but then on the other hand, you said they charge very competitive interest rates on the money borrowed. What does that? I mean, in competitive terms, I'm not asking you for an absolute number, but roughly speaking, what are they then charging? They're charging like a relatively modest amount over the current, I don't know, whichever Fed rate that they're using as a benchmark.
Correct. They're using a benchmark, and it's a calculation or an equation based on that benchmark. So currently, most companies are between 4% and 6% is that figure. But the other thing to understand about it is the insurance company is also charging a simple rate. It's not a compound rate, right. And they actually apply that only once a year on the anniversary date of the policy. So the way I describe it is, if the stated rate is 5%, depending on how quickly you pay that loan back, your effective rate, the amount you actually pay per year, will run anywhere between about 2% and 5%.
Yes, that's really fascinating. That's like in the United Kingdom, they always have this thing called APR, which is average percentage rate, which is a monstrous calculation, because whatever they seem to quote you as an interest rate can end up being compounded into quite a different number. And that's very interesting. So therefore, they are remarkably competitive. And actually, at the moment, to putting that in perspective, 4% to 6%. I mean, you actually can't really borrow in the United States of America at 4% to 6% at the moment in the open market. Certainly, mortgage rates, I think the last time I looked, were 5-ish something. I mean, they've even peaked about 6% recently. So you're getting a very, very good deal in that sort of a zone at the moment, if that's against the prevailing interest rate marketplace in the United States, and particularly not compounded.
Yes, here in the last year in particular, it's looked very attractive at this point. I think I just read a couple days ago that the average mortgage in the U.S. just crossed the 7.5% line.
Yep.
So at 4% to 6% is attractive, not even taking into consideration that it's a simple rate.
No, I mean that's quite sensational. Actually, I'm really really shocked altogether, because I thought they might be using something like sort of a traditional kind of mortgage rate, which is about 150 basis points to 190 basis points most of the way around the world in terms of markup. So that is most impressive, that the insurance companies are essentially letting you borrow at something approaching Fed funds rate, actually, not far off it. That is quite stunning. So, I mean, there are a series of advantages. So you've got the tax issue, you've got the fee issue. Obviously, you're paying load up front, but you're paying a fee, but it's not absolutely colossal, and you certainly don't have any issue thereafter. I suppose that the point is that if you're going to use this structure, the one thing you don't want to do is just sit back and put all the money into your pension fund and not use it. You want to do something that gives you that leverage of borrowing and hopefully giving you either an asset you can enjoy like a Tesla, or possibly better still, the opportunity to do real estate or something like that.
Yes, absolutely. That's actually one of my big soapbox issues, is that this should be an integrated approach to the other things that we're doing. We all, there's a lot of talk and a lot of books and material about diversification. And I think diversification should mean something beyond just a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds and so forth. Why not be diversified, be in the market, be in insurance, annuities, real estate? To me, that creates a more diversified scenario and gives someone even a better shot at success when you're diversifying into some of these other areas. So that's always my message, is these tools, it's not an all or nothing. No one's suggesting that everything you have should go into life insurance policies. But it should be an integrated tool with the overall financial plan, with the other things that you're doing. This is the liquid piece. This is the tax advantaged piece. Sometimes we'll explain a properly structured whole life insurance policy as a replacement for the bond side of a portfolio, because that's supposed to smooth volatility. And so the policies can kind of take the place of that part. Is one way to look at it. So really, it should be integrated into the overall plan with the other types of investments that we're making.
Yes, it gives you but it also gives you a fantastic funding source. I mean, generally, you can be your own bank, because you've got the pension asset that you can take back, as it were, by borrowing against it in order to manage to enhance your returns on whatever it is you care to do. As a matter of interest, I mean, has anybody done anything particularly extreme or wacky? I mean, you mentioned this chap buying a Tesla, but that seems like not an unreasonable approach to life. If you've been a pilot, a bomber pilot like he has. Any really crazy things people have done with their money?
Well, I don't know about crazy. I have lots of examples of uses. Business owner who owned franchise restaurants, fast food restaurants, and he needed to expand, wanted to open a new location, was frustrated with trying to get the money from the bank to finance that expansion. I met him. We kind of educated him on how this process works. And he was able to take money from a retirement account, fund his policy, use the policy loan to finance the opening of that new restaurant. His business collectively, of course, he worked closely with his accountant when we set all this up, but his business collectively repaid that loan to him personally at an interest rate that his CPA advised him was acceptable, that the IRS would accept. So he was able to extract income essentially in the form of loan payments from his business, which created a tax advantage for him, repay that loan personally to the insurance company, and reap the benefits of the interest arbitrage, the tax advantages, et cetera, et cetera. So there's many ways to really use this tool in a creative way. I know people who have financed yachts for their retirement to take off and go on a distance cruise around the world. And RVs is another example where someone will use the policy to finance an RV, take that 2, 3, 4-year trip around the country, sell the RV at the end, pay the policy loan back, and not make any payments in the meantime. So just many creative ways to use this tool.
That's absolutely fascinating. So tell me, I mean, are there any people or groups or types that this is not suitable for?
So I think where this is not going to be suitable are those folks that kind of want to they want to set it and forget it. Maybe this does take some intention. If you're going to borrow money against your policy, you have to have a plan to repay that money. You have to be what I call an honest banker with yourself. And so if there's folks out there that just won't have that discipline or won't pay enough attention, and these policy loans can get it can get away from someone if they're not paying attention. So I would say that's probably the group that it's not suited for. The other group would be the traders out there who the modest returns that we see in these policies over time, unless you're using the policies to do something else with, but they just aren't excited by that, and they need that excitement of the potential for those larger returns. So they're probably not going to be this isn't going to be very appealing to those folks either.
Although I suppose on the other hand, if you're a trader, you could put your lump sum into the pension, let it go, borrow the money back, and then hopefully wildly speculate to your heart's content in order to manage to make some money that way, I imagine.
Yes, absolutely. I have a couple of clients who've taken that approach.
Wow, it's certainly a risky approach. Don't get me wrong, I get it. I mean, you're talking about how you've got to be an honest banker with yourself. I think that's an absolutely key motive to the whole discussion. So, look, I mean, John, it's been really interesting to chat with you today on how you can be your own banker and how you can bank on yourself. And I'm just wondering, I mean, when you look from your perspective with your practice, taking all of these different things. The ability to help people bank on themselves across the world. We always like to ask this question about the capital market revolution. Where do you think the capital market revolution goes next?
Giving that a little thought, the word that comes to mind is hybrid. I think going forward, people are going to look at more of a hybrid approach to how they do their planning. I think in previous generations, it's really been about putting money into a pension plan and letting it grow, or doing a real estate investing, or investing in a business, or whatever the case may be. And I think strategies like what we've been talking about today, Patrick, with some life insurance integrated into that mix, or some annuity products integrated into that mix, as well as some of these we'll call them alternative investments like real estate, et cetera. I think people are going to consider those alternatives as part of the overall investment mix, maybe more than they have in the past. So I think it's going to be a hybrid approach that involves all of the markets, not just the capital markets.
I think that's a fabulously thoughtful message, and I would agree with you, because I always ask this question about the capital market revolution, but it is truly about all kinds of markets and investments in every possible sense. And I think hybrid approaches, given the technological world that we're in, are going to be something very, very exciting for the future. So, I mean, let me say, this has been a most interesting discussion. I think a lot of people, including our commenters, John T. and Ian Miller, are going to both be off trying to find out if these apply to different jurisdictions around the world. I'm certainly quite fascinated to know if it's possible to do these sorts of things in the likes of the UK or other jurisdictions, because it's a most fascinating concept, the ability that you can bank on yourself. Thank you once again, John Ensley, for being our guest. Next week, ladies and gentlemen, we have got an absolutely cracking guest coming to you. We have one of the world's leading experts in commodities markets. So that's going to be another great commodities discussion, building on last week's guest, Rod Gravel at Blondon, who was talking about how to build markets in Africa. Anberg is going to be unraveling global commodities. You can catch us next week, 24th of October, same place, same time, 7 p.m. Central European time. I'm really looking forward to that show. Let me just say once again, a huge thank you. How to bank on yourself has been today's topic with John Ensley. Once again, thanks to John T. and Ian Miller for being our contributors today. And a huge thanks to our production team, who has ever made everything super smooth in the background. Really, really appreciate your time. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Racy. And thank you, Rushlin. My name is Patrick L. Young. I wish you all a great week in life and markets, ladies and gentlemen. And actually, I think that's a great maxim to end on. Be hybrid. See you next week.